Thank you so much for joining us today for our second virtual town hall. And I really hope that you and your families are continuing to be safe and healthy during this difficult time. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by two Texas State Board of Education members as we talk about how COVID-19 has impacted learning in South and West Texas. And I really wanted to have this discussion about public education. Because anyone that knows me knows how passionate I am about this topic. Not only because my mom still continues to teach on the south side of San Antonio, and I hear her every day checking in on her students who have special needs. But also because, public education was key to my story, right? I'm a proud product of Adams Hill Elementary School, Pease Middle School, John Jay High School here in San Antonio. All of that prepared me to earn a 4-year Air Force ROTC scholarship that allowed me to get an education and serve our country. And so when I think about running for Congress and, why I'm motivated to do this, I'm running to protect the opportunities that allowed me to grow up healthy, get an education, and serve our country. And public education was such a key part of that. And so I am especially, excited to be joined by these two experts because between these two women, that covers all 29 counties in Texas 23. And so we've got Gina Perez, who represents District 1, and she actually covers 40 counties, all the way from El Paso County to Medina County, all the way down to Zapata County, excuse me. And so she is an El Paso native, literacy advocate, founder and president of the Rural School Education Program and Scholarship Foundation, and a former English language arts and reading teacher. And she's joining us from Tornillo in El Paso County. Marisa is a San Antonio native and the youngest Latina nationwide to be elected to a state board of education. She represents District 3, which stretches from Bexar County all the way to Hidalgo County. And she has years of experience working as a child advocate in both public schools and the state government. So we're very excited about them joining us today. We're gonna go over the questions that have already been submitted, but if you have additional questions, please put that in the comments section of and on Facebook Live as well. And if you're participating via Zoom, please also share those questions with us, and we will try to get those to us, try to get those answered as able. And just like our previous town hall, we will caption this in Spanish, and this will be available tomorrow morning for those that were not able to join us today. So with that, Gina and Marisa, I'm going to jump right into the questions. Let's see. So here's a question from here, actually in Bexar County. Can you give us a sense of the things you're closely monitoring to ensure our students are still receiving a quality education? And Gina, are there particular challenges you've seen in some of our more rural West Texas counties? And Marisa, what about in some of our more urban areas like here in San Antonio?
Sure. So I first and foremost, Gina, thank you so much for hosting this really important conversation. I think that, as a public school product myself, this is really, really critical. And I know that, everybody's kind of dealing with some really major changes to the way that we have known life. I think this is going to change life forever for us. And so one of the most critical pieces I think that's been really drastically impacted is public education and how we deliver instruction. So in terms of the things that I think are really, really important and what I've been really following is number one, and there's probably going to be a lot of questions about this, but first and foremost is the digital divide. We've always known for a long time that access to technology has been a challenge, especially for our low-income communities of color. It tends to disproportionately impact those groups, right? But I think that now more than ever, when education is all to be expected to be done digitally, our families are really suffering. Our students are really suffering. And so I think that's first and foremost, what does that look like? Because it's not just about one-to-one model where you provide a family with a piece of digital equipment, right, some sort of technology, and then expect that they're going to be able to use it. The reality is, access to broadband is something that, I think a quarter of San Antonians don't even have technology in their home, and then about a little over 20% don't have access to broadband. So right then and there, you're completely excommunicating a population of student that doesn't have access. One of the other things that I'm critically worried about is the fact that the grading policies now are going to be very, very varied. It's going to be, there isn't consistency across the state regarding how grading is going to take place. And so I think about the high mobility rates in Bexar County alone, right? We have students that bounce from school to school, but also from district to district. So depending on, you know, we'll take San Antonio, for example, right? If Northside is grading one particular way, and then SAISD is issuing grades a different way, when you have a student transfer from one district to another, the lack of consistency is going to cause problems for that student. And so I'm wondering right now if the agency has any plans. I know that there hasn't been anything said to this point about consistency, but that's a major concern of mine because I worry about the students that have high mobility. And again, high mobility tends to really impact our low-income communities.
Gina, did you want to offer what you're seeing out in West Texas?
Everything that Marisa said is the same worries and concerns that we have here. In El Paso County, we're number 13 for the most households without internet access. For the urban area, it can be just lack of access due to finances. And so there are quite a few entities that are offering free internet to students now because of coronavirus and the school closures. There are some school districts that are doing their very best to provide digital devices for our high school students. Like Tornillo ISD, they went into their budget to purchase digital devices for the 11th and 12th graders. And I think we see a lot of articles talking about strategically locating school buses to provide the internet access. However, in rural Texas, that's not, there's really no way to define strategic location as to where to place a school bus. And then of course that leaves out the students from 10th grade down. And I will say, just being completely transparent, I don't have a great appreciation for online learning, particularly for elementary students. I still think that in middle school levels, it's very difficult. Online learning is not really the best that we have to offer. There's really no substitute for the classroom, no substitute for a highly qualified, credentialed teacher. And so when we're talking about students who don't have digital devices and students who don't have access to Wi-Fi, perhaps because broadband doesn't exist. Where I live, there is no broadband. We're right now on a hotspot that I purchased specifically to make sure that I could communicate this evening. It's the system as it exists, because the state of Texas hasn't still not invested in broadband for our families, and the concern goes beyond education, right? Because you see predatory lenders everywhere, which is a serious contributing factor to the lack of ability to move yourself up, because you can't invest, you can't access online banking. There's so many concerns, and coronavirus has really put those things in the front of everyone's mind, because in the past it clearly has not been that concern hasn't been taken seriously. And so our students are going to paper pencil packets, right? Which, if you have an educator in the house, I think that's it's probably a good thing. But for families who English isn't their first language, for students whose parents are essential workers, for parents who are also caring for their parents and grandparents, which is very traditional in our community. You have 2, 3, 4, 5 generations all in the same household. Then we start looking at what exactly are students learning, or are they just continuing to review material that they've already seen in the classroom? Mm-hmm. And I think anything is better than nothing. But for our students who have those additional obstacles, their nothing is far greater. And the conversation needs to start now when we're looking at accountability for next year, because our teachers are going to welcome these students in with open arms to their classrooms whenever we can return. And there are going to be some students who are further behind when it comes to looking at the standardized testing requirements that are placed on our teachers and our schools.
Yeah, that actually touches on one of the questions that came in, Gina. And I think I just want to go back just a little bit to a point that you made in that, this lack of infrastructure doesn't just affect educational outcomes. I mean, that's the exact infrastructure that people need to go online and find a job or submit their unemployment, right? Or if they are able to access telehealth, telemedicine, it's that exact same infrastructure. And so this is such an important discussion while we're talking about just healthcare. I mean, we're also talking about the infrastructure that just doesn't exist and continues to leave people behind in a number of ways. I was talking with a friend of mine who's actually a teacher here in San Antonio at a Title I school, and she raised this exact point that you mentioned, Gina. And so I'd love to hear from both of you. As the effect of COVID-19 doesn't end right at the end of the school year, but will rather affect and impact the next school year and maybe beyond that. How is the State Board of Education kind of thinking about what next year looks like?
I mean, so one of the things, again, like I mentioned the grading, and for me, the one thing is, so there are some districts that are deciding to do pass fail. There are some districts that are, trying to figure out what to grade, what not to grade, and what the process looks like. My concern right now, and the State Board of Education has very limited authority, so I want to make sure that I don't. I'd be remiss if I said that, we don't go into districts and tell them how to handle things. But one of the things that I'm concerned with is the fact that so many of our teachers are really just they are being railroaded right now, trying to figure out ways of delivering instruction and trying to figure out how to get the instruction to the students, trying to find their kids, because at this rate, we're looking at maybe about 45% are actually, there's touch points with, and all of this is happening with an understanding that once we come back, God willing, come back in the fall,
right,
most of that time and energy is not going to be spent picking up where we left off. It's going to be backtracking and getting kids back on. We have what's called in education the summer slide. When kids aren't in school for a couple of months during the summer, they have to get just get reacquainted with what they were studying prior, what education is going to look like moving forward, and this is causing an even larger gap. And so, one of the things that I think is really, really critical is we need to consider as a board what kind of message we're going to go to the commissioner with in terms of how we lay out support for our educators and for our administrators, because I think that one of the things that's being lost here is that, we have to worry about the mental health of our educators that are really under a lot of pressure to deliver in a really uncertain, brand new environment where we know we're not hitting our kids, right? We struggle to educate our children to begin with, especially those that experience trauma and have different adverse family, experiences. Mm-hmm. And that's when they're in the classroom. Now imagine having everybody outside of the classroom and teachers still being expected to impact in some way. So one of the things I think, again, we have to consider as a board is, how do we message providing support to our educators and our administrators, and what kind of timeline are we truly setting, and what expectations do we really, really have for delivery of instruction and then progress of students?
Yeah. Gina, what are you hearing from the school districts in West Texas on that point?
For the most part, I think the majority of schools are on the same page with our focus needs to be the effort, more like plant the seeds, and we'll deal with the harvest when we're able to, right? If we're able to go back in the fall, then we can assess where all of our students are when they report to their teachers, to their classrooms. One of the really good things about House Bill 3 is that it allows schools to begin the school year earlier without having to file, for different kind of distinctions and waivers and whatnot. And so I think all of us that are, you know, with the exception of our graduating seniors this year, all of us are going to have some kind of slide. Because there's a great deal of knowledge that our students were supposed to have been exposed to, received, participated in, that without that social setting, they're just simply not going to have. Even with an educator in the house, even with a highly qualified, you know, SBEC credentialed teacher in the house, students are still missing out on that social experience of the classroom, of the discussions, of that participation with their peers. And so that slide is going to be very tangible for the 21 school year. And so with, I think one thing that we have to remember is that when everybody that we call an essential worker is still at risk, right? And that's a lot of our teachers, because we have a lot of school districts that are doing the paper pencil packet, but then teachers have to go into the buildings and make copies. And teachers have to somehow collect these copies and look at the documents for those districts that are not doing the participation grade, but actually grading and entering grades. And so all of those teachers are putting not only their own health at risk, but then whatever, you know, whoever they come into contact with and how long the virus lives on surfaces, and then taking that back home to whoever's in their household. And while I think it's a very noble effort that everyone is making, I think that perhaps there's a bit of reality that we're just not in touch with right now. And so I think the understanding of plant the seeds and we'll harvest next year is the mentality that we need to all adopt with consistency, and perhaps the effort made needs to be the grade versus anything else. Because if a student can't come in, if a student's parent can't pick up the packet, if they don't have online access, what grade are they going to receive? Are they just pushed out? They've been pushed behind, and then now the system is effectively pushing them out. Mm-hmm. And the mental health of our teachers right now is, I think, everyone's biggest concern. That's the biggest concern that I receive on a daily basis, how teachers are dealing with this. And I think it's very nice that everybody hears, oh, we love our teachers. Oh, you know, you're able to teach the lesson without writing the teaks on the board. And you're, you know, what do parent-teacher conferences look like now after this? And I think it's nice to take a light-hearted approach and a comical approach to that. But the truth is, I still don't think that we're treating our teachers the way that we should be. Calling them essential workers, having them come into buildings, making paper pencil packets, trying to get them home, trying to take attendance, all of that is just, it's not realistic. It's not healthy. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, exactly what is it that you get out of that? What's the goal there? And I think the biggest worry is, well, if they're not demonstrating that they're doing something and there's no physical evidence that they've done something, then is the state of Texas okay continuing to pay their salaries? Mm-hmm. And so the idea that teachers during a pandemic need to justify their salaries, it tells us a great deal about exactly how Texas continues to devalue the humans and the profession.
As the daughter of a public educator, I am all on board for making sure that our teachers are, you know, finally resourced, but to your point, respected for the valuable service they provide to not only our students and our communities, but for our country, right? And one of the reasons I like to talk about, I think it's important we talk about public education, and to your point, Gina, how public education plays out in Texas is because we have such an outsized effect on the academic preparedness of the country, right? 1 in 10 kids in the country calls Texas home. Right, 1 in 10. So that we have an outsized effect, not only in the health of our young people, but on the academic preparedness. And as somebody that worked in national security for almost 15 years, right, we've got big issues if we don't have enough of our population academically prepared for the challenges that we face as a country. I want to bring in a question that came in. This came in from Maverick County, and it came in Spanish. ¿Qué recursos hay disponibles para estudiantes a los que el inglés no es su primer lenguaje o el primer lenguaje de sus padres?
You want to go first, Gina?
Bueno, sinceramente, los recursos para los estudiantes que su primer lenguaje no es inglés son muy pocos, la verdad, porque también tenemos que entender o aceptar que los estudiantes que su primer lenguaje no es inglés también faltan en muchas casas, en muchas familias, las computadoras, acceso del Wi-Fi, acceso del Internet. Entonces, para entender o para aceptar realidad para esos estudiantes, para esas familias, tenemos que entender que las maestras están intentando, pero esa intención tiene que ser lo máximo que debemos que expectar de nuestras maestras. Y para esos estudiantes, todavía faltan, todavía el Estado estamos fallando ese grupo de estudiantes, la verdad. Sinceramente, estamos nosotros fallando.
No voy a repetir lo que dijo Georgina, pero es la verdad. Cuando pensamos en las maestras y la salud mental de las maestras, es muy importante porque las maestras bilingües siempre van a ser número uno de apoyar los niños, las niñas que no hablan inglés. So, la agencia de educación ahora todavía no tienen recursos. Por lo menos tienen los recursos que tienen subidos en el internet, que estaban en inglés, lo traducieron en español, pero sí que hablar de organizaciones que sí están tratando de ayudar a las familias, a apoyar a las familias. Y una de las organizaciones en que yo estoy pensando es IDRA, so IDRG. So IDRA hace mucho, siempre están apoyando cosas de educación, y ellos tienen algo que se llama un web series, free web series. So es seminarios por el web que son gratis para las familias y los ofrecen en español. Y son diferentes webinars de cómo puedes apoyar a su hijo a leer o hacer sus matemáticas. Cómo puedes navegar trabajando cuando tienes que también apoyar a su estudiante. So, cosas así. Esa organización está haciendo muchas cosas para apoyar a las familias. Y cuando la agencia de educación no pueden ayudar, y los distritos están muy atrasados en ayudar a los niños, tenemos organizaciones como IDRA que pueden ayudar en eso.
Thank you for taking that question. This question comes in from Brewster County, and it's related to the relief package that was recently passed that includes funds for K through 12 education. So in the $2 trillion relief package Congress passed, $13.5 billion was set aside for K through 12 education to assist, the 55 million students out of school. Additionally, $3 billion will go to governors for emergency education costs. Can you give us a sense of how monies received for Texas students will be used?
So there's no way to tell, to be honest. And what I would say is, I think that, I would really implore that our congressmen and our senators, when working in DC, really work to put some stipulations on what, particularly that $3 billion that goes to governors is going to look like, because I think right now the way that it's written, and the way at least I'm interpreting, is that $3 billion goes directly to the governor, and the governor gets to decide how to allocate it. If we don't put any kind of guidelines or restrictions on that from DC, then God knows what's going to happen with that funding, and there isn't any way to tell because it's going to be up to the governor to decide. And so I will say that through the School Superintendent Association here in Texas, they've asked that regulations be put in place to help guide that funding, and that's absolutely critical because otherwise it's going to be another rainy day fund that we have no voice for. So I'm really concerned about that.
Okay. Let's see, we've got just a couple more minutes left. And so we want to hear, we know you're hearing the challenges, but we also hope you're hearing the success stories, right? So can you share some of the success stories from teachers and administrators who have done so much to continue educating our students during this crisis?
One of the things that I think everybody, or hopefully everyone, has been able to see is that teachers in Texas are predominantly seem to have this heart that is immeasurable. They are, for all intents and purposes, they're literally risking their own health to make sure that their students are not left behind, or doing their very best to make sure that that gap is as small as possible, based on the constraints that we're all living under right now. So they're preparing meals and serving meals every day. They're making copies. They're picking up workbooks and textbooks and art supplies and putting them in packets, in some places on a daily basis and in some places on a weekly basis. They're doing drive-by lessons and parking in front of houses and maintaining 10 feet and teaching through windows and teaching through glass doors and making sure that under the constraints that we're all living under, that there's still some kind of semblance of that social connection that a classroom provides. And not only because of the constraints that they're working under, physical and emotional, they're doing this because teachers in so many situations are first responders, right? And so when we're looking at students who are overwhelmed and overpowered with fear of the unknown, when can I see my friends? When can I go back to school? Do I have to repeat this grade? Will I be taking the STAR test in the summer? Because who knows what a 9-year-old understands? Who really knows what the 13-year-old is comprehending? And then they see their parents who are either essential workers and having to leave the house, or worried about, how do I pay rent? How do I pay mortgage? How do I keep food on the table? How do I keep the lights on? And all of that somehow gets into our students' brains. And how is that impacting them? And our teachers realize that that's something else that's happening. And so more than school being paper, pencil, reading, writing, arithmetic, it's also society's safety net. We catch our students because of who are experiencing homelessness, who are in foster care, who are being neglected, and just need that extra counselor to reach out to, a person to look in on them. And so when we're looking at how often Zoom is crashing, and we look at that from the perspective of, oh, now another obstacle. Well, we can also look at that from the perspective of how diligently our teachers are trying to stay in touch and continue that communication, continue to reach out, and continue their very best to be that safety net to make sure that whatever your needs are, somehow we're going to meet them. And that goes beyond reading and writing and arithmetic.
Absolutely.
And that only happens because of the outreach of our classroom teachers.
Absolutely. Marisa, did you want to add something to that?
I mean, Gina summed it up very beautifully.
Okay.
The one I will add though, I do also want to acknowledge our school board members across the state, because I think they've also had to navigate really interesting dynamics. They're responsible for quite a bit of policy at the local level, and many of them that I know, a vast majority, have taken advantage of some of the waivers regarding their rulemaking in order to allow our superintendents to make quick decisions that have to be made, right? So I applaud our board members for stepping aside, relinquishing a little bit of power back to the school leaders so that they can make those decisions as soon as they need to happen. So I'm very grateful to them for that. And finally, I just want to say, like, I think that one of the great positives, maybe not positives, right, but I think one of the opportunities that I think that we probably need to start looking at is this is an excellent time to challenge status quo regulations, status quo policy, because it's unfortunate that it took a pandemic to test us. But I don't think, and I in my time in education, I've never seen policy switch and movement so quickly as the reaction has been to make adjustments for COVID. And so if policies and procedures that seemed arbitrary when we were having to follow them were that quickly removed so that we can get things done and make changes that need to be changed, all that happened so quickly, then maybe we don't ever have to revert back to some of those policies, right? Those policies have to be put back into place. Let's challenge the system, right? Let's challenge those practices, and let's see what we can do to change up and shake up the systems that we already know have not always served all of our kids.
Right.
Wow. Well, thank you, Gina, Marisa, for joining us today. And look, if we've got any teachers that are joining us, I want to thank you really for continuing to do the work that is so critical, especially under these difficult circumstances. I see Sandy Young here participating in our Zoom call, and Sandy was my counselor when I was one of my counselors when I was at Pease Middle School, right? And so I know the heart of a teacher doesn't end when they retire, right? I mean, that continues. And so thank you ladies for what you're continuing to do to make sure that our students continue to receive a quality education. And you're right, Marisa, this has highlighted and challenged our assumptions about, what is the best way to make sure that we are truly investing in and tapping into the potential that exists in every single child in Texas. So thank you. And for those last thing, this really came about, this discussion came about because folks filled out our survey and mentioned that, there's a lot of questions and concerns about how things are progressing in light of what's going on under COVID-19. So please fill out that survey. You can do so in English and in Spanish, and we use that to determine, the information that we push out, and also, our next virtual town hall, which will happen next week. So please, continue to fill that out. We've got resources on the website as well as on our social media that can be helpful in any way. But really, I hope everyone continues to stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.